This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome back to Canary Cast. In this week's pod, Norwich City's trip to the Theatre of Dreams turns into more of a nightmare. Watford look to be dragging themselves clear of trouble with an emphatic win over relegation rivals Bournemouth. Being January, we have transfers to talk about with both outgoings and incomings at Carrow Road. As always, I'm joined by Jacob.
Hello, mate.
Producer Harvey is on the decks, trust me, just hasn't got a mic this week. And finally, we are delighted to be joined by a special guest for what is our 10th pod. EDP and Pinkun Norwich City reporter, the Strawberry Blonde Don, Connor Southwell is in the building. Connor, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for that lovely nickname.
You're welcome. Whether you take it or not
I've
is
been
up to
called
you.
worse, so
Yeah,
I'll take it.
Exactly. Right. Connor, I thought we'd start with you because it was not so long ago you found yourself in a similar sort of situation to what we're in now, voluntarily doing fan media. You're now covering Norwich games professionally.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'm there.
You're doing a bloody good job, trust me. But you must be living the dream, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if, a few more wins wouldn't go amiss, but yeah, absolutely. In terms of the position that I dreamed of, it's certainly lived up to that expectation. I think for me, it's been fantastic beyond perhaps what we've seen on the pitch. And I've really enjoyed it, and I think it just goes to show for anyone who commits their time to it, actually, that hard work can get you into places that perhaps you don't dream of. And I'm someone who doesn't have a journalism degree. I went to uni for a year before obviously leaving to take this job. So I think it just goes to show that if you work hard and get your face out there, then there are opportunities for you. And yeah, I'm loving it so far.
Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head there. It's been really nice for us to see it, hasn't it, Jake? But there is a pathway from this sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's it, mate. I think you've actually taken Connor's old role.
Yeah.
Yeah, the pressure, big shoes to fill, innit?
Yeah.
But yeah, like you say, Joe, it's great to see that someone, like you say, who hasn't got not the experience, but the qualifications that you feel like, I'm going to need this to go. Yeah.
I think it shows there's a different route, because certainly when I was at school, I think it was very much, this is the direction you have to go down. You have to get grades and you have to get qualifications. And I think it goes to show, as I said, that there are opportunities. You just have to find someone willing to take a chance on you, and you have to work hard. And it's amazing. I mean, I always used to say with Ben when we did our show, you never know who's watching. You might have 30 people watching, but the one person might offer you a job. And that's key to remember, I think, is not to lose hope with it, because it can be quite a lonely place at times, I think, when you're doing it voluntarily, because ultimately you're not getting paid and you're given a lot of time, and that's a difficult thing to grasp. But you've got to persist with it, and if you enjoy it, then it's worth doing, as far as I'm concerned. As soon as that enjoyment stops, I think then everything else becomes redundant.
I think also it shows that you don't need a degree or a piece of paper to show that your opinion matters and is valid. I think you've shown that in various ways. Like, you can speak your opinion and it can be correct. It doesn't need to be downed because you're young or anything like that.
Absolutely. What's the transition been like from fan to reporter?
Interesting. I think perhaps when you do this, you suddenly realise the intensity of it. I think the intensity would probably shock some people. Certainly people who don't like football. I know there's a few people in my family who go, what's stressful about it? You're just sitting right about football, right? But it can be intense. I think for me, stepping into somewhere that had such a massive audience was obviously a big deal, big shoes to fill as well, in terms of Michael, who's obviously fantastic at what he does. So I was very aware of that, very aware that it might take some adaptation for me, but also for other people. I think the biggest thing has been scrutiny. I think people, and you have to make sure, and it's good because it makes you self-improve. People are quick to jump on you if you get things wrong, and rightly so, because we're in a place where we should be factually accurate and we should be correct. Obviously, opinion's a different matter because that's subjective, and me and you could disagree about something. I think it's the way we do that. But yeah, the biggest thing for me has been that the scrutiny and the eyes on the work is obviously a big sort of, it's quite overwhelming at points. But I think it's been 4 months now. So getting there slowly. I wouldn't say I'm totally there yet. I think it's still very much a period of adaptation. If you want to link it to Norwich City's Premier League assault, then go for it. But yeah, that's the biggest thing for me. Scrutiny and also people's perceptions, I think, change quite quickly.
Excellent. You've rounded that up. Lovely, mate. Right, I thought we'd do some sort of quick fire questions about the season so far.
Okay.
Nothing too testing. Favourite moment of the season so far?
Got to be that Manchester City win. I think I don't think there's too many answers beyond that. That was brilliant. My first game working as well.
Not a bad start.
Not a bad start at all. So yeah, I'd have to say that one. I think it was shock more than anything else, to be honest. When you're writing a match report, it's difficult to concentrate when you've got a game of that magnitude unfolding in front of you. That's for sure.
Yeah. Opposite of that, worst moment.
Worst moment. Getting Burnley in the FA Cup.
Another trip to Lancashire.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a tough one. United was in terms of the display was quite dispiriting, I think. Tottenham at home, because of the whole VAR fiasco, that was difficult because I felt Norwich deserved, particularly in that first half, a bit more. In terms of results, I think probably that run where they played Burnley, Palace, and were just losing 2-0 constantly, and that was difficult because they weren't quite where they needed to be, and I think as watching someone who's obviously followed Norwich for a while, that's quite disheartening after everything this team gave us last year. So I think I'd say that run, but there's probably more of those moments to choose.
There's
than,
a few
than the
to
best
choose
moments,
from,
yeah.
that's for sure. Best away ground for Press.
Best away. Old Trafford was pretty good.
It looked nice up there, like lots of room, lots of TVs.
Yeah, well, you say lots of room. It was quite actually confined in the actual press box. Best Burnley was quite good actually, surprisingly. That was quite good in terms, maybe not in terms of the media room though. They've all got different elements, I think, that you take from each of them and apply to one. For example, Preston had a really nice press room, but the press box was really tight as well. So I think I'd probably go, Manchester United, but probably just.
Nice. What is Carrow Road like for Press? Is it any good?
Yeah, it's good. I don't want to say anything too negative, so they might not let me in on Saturday. But no, it's good. It's good. You get well looked after, which is the main thing. Obviously, the viewing position's pretty decent as well. I don't particularly like the chairs you have to sit on. I don't know. Most people won't know this, but they're like almost like swivel chairs. So
really?
They work. So if you had two next to each other, you have to pull one out and pull it to an angle to sort of get in, and if two people are trying to get in at the same time, it's quite difficult, and sometimes you end up having to climb in, but beyond that it's brilliant.
Yeah. Jacob, anything to add, mate?
Well, yeah, I think the most important question, which you've missed out, Joe, which is fine, is food. Who's laying on the best display of food in this league?
I'll take Paddy's advice here and say that's an unwritten rule that I won't disclose such information, but there's plenty of decent ones out there.
Excellent stuff. Nice little intro done. So we'll go on to the Theatre of Screams, as I saw you titled it. We'll go through the game pretty much chronologically, and then we'll have a bigger discussion at the end. So if we sort of think back to before the game, Pookie obviously out, Ida in. Ida. Sorry, God, I was pulling you up on it last week.
Alan from Stalham is going to be even
furious. So big opportunity for Ida. I mean, how do you? Obviously, we had Shrabeni leave that week as well, but it was a big ask of Ida, or was it not? What did you make of him starting?
I think it was a big ask. Obviously, for an 18-year-old to make your Premier League sort of start, your first Premier League start at Old Trafford is as big as it comes, and equally he was up against Harry Maguire and Victor Lindelof, two sort of internationally recognised defenders, the most expensive defender in the world, regardless of what you think of Harry Maguire. That's quite a big ask for an 18-year-old to do. Obviously, of course, he was set to go out on loan to League One. I think he had pretty much the majority of League One chasing him at one stage. So it was always going to be a big ask, I think, particularly when he'd been on cloud 9 the week before and scored a hat-trick. I think it was quite nice in terms of realisation for him to actually put him in that environment and see how he did. What I would add is I don't think Timu Pukki would have done much better in the situation that the Norwich found themselves in, because ultimately I kind of felt that they were so wary of the counter-attack. They dropped back so deep to the point where they were just on the back foot, and Ida was isolated for a lot of it. There were a couple of nice touches. I remember one in the first half where he got his body between Maguire and the ball and just knocked it off neatly, which is a small thing, but really good to see from a centre forward in terms of that style of play. So I don't think it was a bad performance. Probably not the best environment, I think, to throw a youngster in for their first start, given the type of game it was, and perhaps what Norwich needed up front was a bit of nous and someone who could relieve the pressure. But overall, I wouldn't say it was a bad performance, but not great either. I think it was probably what he needed after Preston, to be honest.
Mo Leitner found himself on the bench, and I want to come to both of you on this. My point is, was it more out of necessity because we didn't have a spare striker on the bench, or is he beginning to find himself back involved with the squad?
Well, he had a good enough game against Preston. I think you waxed lyrical about him, maybe a little bit too much because of your soft spot for Mo. But yeah, probably necessity more than anything else, because like you say, there wasn't really anyone else available. Unfortunately, I know we're going to get onto it later, but the whole performance was just very disappointing, wasn't it? Very passive, I think, is the best word I can use in a kind way.
Connor, is there a way back in for Mo, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think if he works hard enough, I think it's difficult because the queue ahead of him is so good. I think in Teti, I think has been performing well. I actually think he's quietly becoming a contender perhaps for the player of the season debate in terms of what he's become. He's gone from a player who couldn't get in the team and didn't look like he could pass to suddenly Norwich's best holding midfielder, which, considering they got a guy in from Sevilla to do that job, is quite impressive. Vrancic as well has returned to the fold. Tom Tribal, you can add into that equation as well. What I would say about Leitner is I think when he's played earlier on in the season, he was tried as almost like this floaty number 10, sort of this half 10, half 8, sort of in between the two, and it didn't quite work. I think it got a bit muddled, and it was similar to what he played in the Championship at Bramall Lane at Sheffield United, sort of a similar kind of role, and he never really quite took to that in the same way he can when he's almost in that role where he can orchestrate possession and orchestrate the phases of play that Norwich have to build up into attack. But I really like him. I think he's a really talented player. If he can keep his head right and knuckle down and work hard, then I think there's definitely a place for him in the side, because Norwich do need a midfielder who can progress the ball up the pitch, and he's probably one of, if not the best, that they've got if they can get him right and get the structure around him right, I think, for me.
I feel like the thing is, like Connor's saying, is without the ball, you have to carry him at times. I think almost it reminds me of when Maro Vrancic was here in the first season, in terms of you could see there was a player there. I think Leitner is actually better than Vrancic in terms of display, passing the ball and all this kind of thing. But Vrancic showed in that second season, and obviously continuing, that he's used or improved his physical attributes, which I feel Mo is still too lightweight on the ball. And I don't know. I don't think he's not got the pace to be able to get out of tight situations or anything like that. And I think he is also a confidence player in terms of he needs to be loved and things like that, which is probably why it's not happened in other clubs for him, which why he's with us, really.
Final point I want to make before we get onto the game itself. We had 4 academy graduates in the squad going to Old Trafford. It was rather nice, wasn't it? Amazing.
Yeah, an amazing achievement for any football club, and to go to a football club that prides itself on youth, rightly or wrongly at the moment. It's absolutely a massive achievement, considering where this club was 4 years ago, when really the only youth product they sort of brought through the system with the Murphy twins, and before that you're probably going back to Declan Rudd and Jed Steer, who weren't overly successful at Norwich, and so it's a massive achievement. I think it goes to show what is capable of hard work, and when you believe in the processes you've got, because what it did require when Stuart Webber came in, and Daniel Farker as well deserves credit, because he's given those players a go and almost found a home for them in the first team, and also put out some really experienced players in order to find homes for them young players. If you think about Sir Ben Godfrey, for example, when Daniel Farker arrived at the club, probably had Russell Martin, Marcel Franca, both ahead of him. Two experienced guys, one at the football club, one from Germany. Ben Godfrey's had to fight. So I think equally it's a show of the club's hard work and also the individual's hard work, and they should be really proud of themselves. And I'm sure the academy reflected on that as being a really successful period. But equally, what supporters can't do and what perhaps we can't do in the media so much is expect this to be a regular thing where it's 4 or 5 players coming through it. It might be a bit more of a drip feed, and then sometimes you get 2 and sometimes you get 1, and that's the nature of youth recruitment. But I think they're very excited about the group they've got coming through at the moment, but it's about moulding them, isn't it? And it's not often that you get a crop of young players come through like Norwich City have at the moment. And what we've got to remember is they're still frighteningly young. I mean, Max Aarons is 20, Ben Godfrey is 21, Todd Cantwell as well. So it's a really frighteningly good group, and I do kind of fear what that means for Norwich if they end up in the Championship. But equally, I don't think anyone would. I know we're going to come on to this later, but I don't think anyone would begrudge them a move given how much affinity you have for them. But yeah, an amazing achievement to have 4 academy graduates at Old Trafford. It's just a shame the memory won't be as good with the performance.
I think in terms of the youth, like you're saying, I think we'll look back at this period and the emotional attachment you have with these players and this whole squad in general, and look back at it and think that is actually unique in terms of, like Connor said, you take it for granted now, but when you look back look back in the future and look at the careers that Cantwell will go on and have, Godfrey will go on and have, you go, yeah, I'm proud of that. Like we have with Maddison. And that was only 1 year, so yeah.
Yeah. So let's sink our teeth into the game itself. Let's go over the first half. A poor first half by all accounts. Never really ventured too far from our own half. Jacob, I'll come to you first.
Well, it took United 27 minutes to score, but yeah, we were just so passive in terms of, as Colin alluded to earlier, so scared of that counter-attack that we were so deep. And it was just, we couldn't get out as well. As soon as we had the ball, they penned us in. And like we've discussed on previous pods, as soon as a team press Norwich, they do seem to really struggle in terms of getting out. And for that first goal, it's a disappointment, isn't it? I think Mata could have a cup of tea, a biscuit, read the paper, be able to pick. It's a lovely ball in, but he's had so much time to be able to deliver that in. And I feel like Zimmerman/Aarons not correctly in position to be able to deal with Rashford at the back stick, who's obviously prodded it past Krul.
Yeah, I don't want to sort of make fun of pointing out mistakes, but who gets the blame there, Connor? Is it Cantwell letting him cut in too early? Is it sort of a mixture of Aarons and Zimbo not clearing at the far post?
Before I answer that question, I will do. I'll give you a nice little stat about Juan Mata, which you might not thank me for. Saturday was, he obviously got 2 assists. The last time he did that in the Premier League was 2012. Do you know who the opponent was?
Us.
It certainly was.
I'm going to go even sadder for you and rival you with this. Juan Mata always does well against Norwich. Scored the latest Premier League goal in Premier League history against Norwich. Went Chelsea on his debut when we lost 3-1 when Ruddy knocked Drogba out.
Good knowledge,
there
lads.
We go.
Sweaty, there we go. Look, nerds combined.
Canary Cast is a one-stop shop for everything you need.
I think in terms of the goal, it probably sums up what I think about Norwich at the moment in terms of the small margins. And I said it in my post-match sort of video that I did in terms of saying Norwich are so overly reliant on the small margins in games. And when you're so overly reliant on them and they're not going in your favour, ultimately you probably don't have enough to win games outright, and that's where they are. But I don't think it was probably an individual's fault. First and foremost, I don't think the structure was good enough off the ball on Saturday, and I wrote that the same today. And equally, I think it was probably the individual lapses of concentration that you mentioned there in terms of not Todd Cantwell letting him get in a crossing position. It's clever from Rashford to find that space in between Aarons and Zimmerman, but equally someone has to take some responsibility there, I think. But that's it, isn't it? It's the young squad. It's the inexperience of it, and Todd Cantwell might let Juan Mata do that. But and I mean, it's sad to think about this, given that chances are he probably won't be at Norwich, but in 2-3 years he grows out of that. It's almost a way to expose young players to it, because they have to make mistakes. Unfortunately, they've made as a squad quite a few of them this year, but it was a disappointing goal to concede, because as bad as Norwich were, they were still in the game, and probably more pertinent with the second goal, I think, given that I mean they were poor and it was an individual error, but I think the sloppiness in possession contributed to a lot of what we saw on Saturday as well, because they didn't keep the ball anywhere near as well as they have done in recent weeks. And to me, it was a performance on the whole that, for the first time, I've really seen a Norwich team who looked almost in awe of their opponents and sort of didn't feel like they were good enough for where they were. And I think that's a real shame given how much they've defied the odds over the last 18 months.
I think Connor said we're in the game. You do remind yourself that we are the only team in the league who have not picked up a point from a losing position yet this season, which, like you say, the first goal does always seem very important in a Norwich game this season, unfortunately, which is probably due to the young mentality of the team, really.
A sort of a flash of attacking flair. Wendy are playing Cantwell through towards the end of the first half. Good save from De Gea.
Well, yeah, he's drawn out 3 United defenders, and Wan-Bissaka's gone. That's why Todd's in that left-hand position on his own. I think it's a really good position from De Gea. I don't know why I'm trying to correct him, and like we've criticised him before, especially when Watford and all that kind of thing. But yeah, it was a really good save. And Todd, I don't think, can hit it any more sweetly in terms of there's no criticism in terms of his shooting. And yeah, you're thinking that's your chance, isn't it, just before half time? But then on the other side of it, you think half time, maybe we do have a chance. And then obviously second half unravels as it does.
Well, my next point entirely. I mean, we come out for the second half and you think, right, let's have a good first 10 minutes here. And we're 3-0 down within the first 10 minutes.
Yeah, completely. Rashford ball through, Buendia switches off, Williams is in. And I can see why Krul's done it. I remember when we beat Everton for that first goal, he's slid out, didn't we? We talked about it on the podcast. And he won the ball, then passed it to Simbo, who flicked up to McLean, flick on. Cantwell eventually scores in that Everton game. So he's trying to do that kind of thing, trying to win the ball, get it gone. It's just a wet turf, isn't it? And he's once he's gone. He's not going to be able to retract that. I didn't think there was that much contact on Williams, but I looked at the reaction of Krul and he wasn't hugely disappointed. He wasn't coming out wagging the finger, which we've seen him do in terms of like Arsenal at home and stuff. Yeah, he thought it was a penalty. So,
Connor, I'll come to you for the third goal, Martial header.
Thank you.
I mean,
oh God,
I'll let you answer it how you want, but for my money, if Martial's winning a header against Grant Hanley and sort of Alex Tete as well, that's not great.
No, it's not. It's not. Yeah, disappointing goal to concede, but again, and you touched upon it there in terms of the Cantwell chance, and it just comes down to almost those moments, doesn't it? And in a different situation, in a different game, Hanley clears the header and Norwich reset, and it was I think it was a quick corner.
Quick corner.
Yeah. And so it's almost you've got to gear yourself to that now. I think a lot of what they do, and I mentioned the lapses in concentration earlier. It just feels like in games the tempo is a bit too much and it's taking them a bit by surprise, to be honest. And that again comes back to their youth and their top flight inexperience, which is why I think they've made the moves they have this week that we've seen in the transfer market. But equally, you've got to adapt to that, and they haven't quite adapted to that. And I mean, how many goals from set pieces have we seen them concede this season? I think.
Well, there's a good stat about that actually. Conceded 10 goals from corners and indirect free kicks.
There you go.
That's more than the previous 4 Premier League campaigns, which is already so not combined.
Out of 45 goals conceded in total, I think it is. So it goes show, and I do think, in fairness, from open play, and I said this before the United game, I think in open play their defensive structure and their defensive shape has improved a lot, to the point where in terms of open play they are limiting teams to a lot less than what they were earlier in the season. They're still conceding big chances, but a lot less and on a lot less frequency than they were early on in the season. But if you can't defend those areas right, and you mentioned it there, if you can't win your duels and if you can't use your physicality against players that you should be more dominant than, then that spells big trouble, and sadly you only end up in one place.
Mason Greenwood eventually added the 4th. Before that, Brandon Williams with a miss of the season.
It's up there, isn't it?
It's got to be.
Yeah, it is. This I don't really know how he's missed. I can't really explain how he has.
Pity.
Yeah. Apart from he's not left-footed, that's the only thing I can think of. But yeah, it's a poor miss. And then as soon as Green was warming up, it's one of those where I thought he's a good player. I think he could. He's going to score. He does like a pot shot from range, doesn't he? And he's got that confidence we talked about on the previous pod. We like a player who can shoot with both feet. And again, it's just, I think it sums up the whole performance, didn't it? Didn't get close enough to him. Long range effort, and it's gone in. And it's just the cherry on top of the disappointing cake, really, isn't it? It was interesting that This is the first time away since Liverpool away that we've conceded 2 or more goals, which is surprising for a bottom of the table team, isn't it? Yeah. But you think, like Connor was saying, from open play, we're not that bad. It's not bottom place dreadful. It's just those set pieces and the first goals which seem to be killing Norwich off. And like again, like Connor said, we just looked in awe of an average Manchester United side. I'm not going to say they're anything special because I don't think they are. I don't think the fans think they are. But a bit of pressure, the goals at the right times to kill Norwich off just did the job.
Yeah, so Norwich eventually slumping to a 4-0 defeat at Old Trafford. Are we talking about the worst performance of the season so far?
I think Watford was probably worse, given the magnitude of game. I think they get away with it slightly because of the calibre of opponent and the stage that they were on. Look, situation in game didn't help them at all. I think there's certainly an argument to say that if Norwich get awarded the Brandon Williams penalty, then it could possibly get overturned. I think that's my opinion. I think it's very difficult to rob Manchester United of a penalty at Old Trafford. Equally, I thought it was a penalty. Probably there was probably enough contact there to be frank. But like I said, Krul doesn't come rushing out. If Grant Hanley wins the header, it's small margins, isn't it? And as I said earlier, as bad as they were in the game at 1-0, and that Cantwell chance goes in. I don't know. Part of it feels fortune, and then part of it feels like quality. And I'm somewhere between the two of thinking they've had bad fortune, but then there's the old saying, isn't it? You make your own luck. But yeah, make no mistake, it was a poor performance. I think half time I described it as turgid. They didn't really respond in the second half, particularly for me. Nothing really altered, apart from when they went to a free at the back and got some joy for the last sort of 10, 20 minutes or so. But then equally, how easy is it to play when you're 3-0 down? It's easy to go out and plaster the ball because what's the pressure? What's the expectation? There is none. So yeah, it was bad. I'd certainly file it as one of, but for me, I think that Watford performance will take some trumping. But I don't want to talk anything up given the calibre of game we've got on Saturday.
Well, in terms of like key decisions and stuff, you say that our friends at UREF who've helped us out with about Anthony Taylor and that kind of thing, saying that United have actually been the best treated team in terms of contentious decisions this season. Norwich are 14th. So, like you say, if the Brandon Williams penalty comes our way, you don't want to make excuses, but yeah, you could see it potentially being overturned.
14th is better than I thought it would be, to be honest. It feels like we've got the raw end of the deal, but perhaps that's because we're sat bottom.
In terms of VAR, they've certainly been one of the worst affected sides in terms of decisions their way, which again is out of their control, isn't it? I mean that, and we can talk about that Timu Pukki goal, I think, until the cows come home, but that just for me epitomises this season in a nutshell, because it's millimetres and it sums up Norwich, doesn't it? Where they're not far away, but just not quite close enough either. And it was agonising that. But equally, they can't blame officials, I think, for their shortcomings. They're just not good enough, sadly. I don't think, as I've said before, I don't think it's anything more sinister than that. You can point towards a lack of investment or anything else that you want to point at, but ultimately the squad they've got and the squad they've gone with isn't probably cut out for this standard.
Yeah, I mean that's two relatively poor performances against United now. So much so that victories against Norwich account for 13% of Solskjaer's victories as Man United manager.
Can we play you every week?
Yeah, it's getting into that territory, isn't it? I mean, after the game, it was great to see that the fans were voicing sort of their love for the team. I mean, you were there, Connor. Just talk us through how that scene sort of played out.
Brilliant. I was typing away at the end as the full-time whistle went, sort of turned to my right and was expecting to see a very empty away end. Given the result, it was borderline of a hiding, really, wasn't it? And probably, as you talked about the Brandon Williams miss, it probably should have been 5, maybe even 6. In terms of the chances that Manchester United created, and we've already discussed, was it the worst performance of the season? Maybe not, but it was certainly up there. And to sort of turn to my right hand side, the Norwich fans were sort of on my right in the corner, and just to see a sea of yellow and green in what was a pretty empty Old Trafford at that point was incredible, and the players were taken aback by that. Christoph Simon almost tried to go right to the front or right at the edge of the pitch and sort of held both hands up in apology, and I think it took all of the players to the point where some players had gone and came back because it was so big, and that for me epitomises this football club and its support, because regardless of highs and lows, and people have their own opinions, I don't think that they lose hope and they lose love, and particularly for this team, which I think is an exception in recent years. And even when Daniel Farker came over, clapped the fans in his usual way, sort of walked off, and then the fans sort of serenaded him with, "There's only one Daniel Farker," which I don't think would happen very often for a Premier League team, 8 points adrift at the bottom for their coach. So for me, that was a special moment. I think the players appreciated it because, as we said, they're a young side. They made mistakes. They knew they made mistakes. They didn't take the opportunity that perhaps they dreamt of and perhaps they thought they could have. But they got well received by supporters. And I think often in terms of, we talk about moments in seasons rather, I think sometimes you have to extract morale from somewhere, and I think the supporters generated that on Saturday. What the longer lasting effects are, I don't know. I'm not saying Norwich come out and suddenly look like a confident side because the fans were singing, but equally, it lifted heads, and that's what it needed to do, because like I said, it could have easily been a negative reception where they got booed off the pitch and heads were even lower, but it wasn't, and I think the players were grateful for that. But yeah, in terms of my perspective, I thought it was brilliant to see, because it just goes to show that regardless of the situation, these fans never lose hope.
Spot on. Don't need to add anything else.
No, it was nice to see. Well, so that's what happened. I want to now address the rest of the league, but sort of the games that concern Norwich. So we'll start with Bournemouth and Watford.
Bournemouth, wow, yeah. Not great, are they? They're in a big problem, aren't they, right now, in terms of Eddie Howe, even after the game, saying he needs to review his position. Never sounds great, does it, from a coach? He'll never get sacked. He's got a job for life there in terms of what he's done for that club. But yeah, mounted injury lists, obviously Norwich know that better than anyone in terms of how that can derail a season. And the thing with Bournemouth is they've always conceded goals, but they've always looked like scoring, and this year they just don't. There's too many players out of form, and those who are missing are injured. So it's a cocktail for only one thing, and that's the Championship at the moment.
Yeah. Connor, thoughts on Bournemouth?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a failure to evolve in terms of what they've tried to do from a philosophical point of view, and also probably a bit of poor recruitment. So I wouldn't perhaps lay the blame solely at Eddie Howe's door. I think obviously a massive portion of it is to blame. And look, he may turn them around. I know they've had a few slumps in the past, but probably not to this extent, because they are in free fall at the moment. But in terms of the recruitment, and I'm looking at Dominic Solanke and
20 million
like that. In terms of the way they want to play, and in terms of the players they've recruited, the two don't quite join up. And for me, it still feels quite a rigid 4-4-2 that they're playing with wings. I don't want to say they've been found out, because it's probably quite lazy. But like I said, I think they've probably struggled to evolve. And similar to what's happening with Tottenham this year, in terms of they've had a core group of players for 5 or 6 years. And I think when you do that, and obviously you age, and like I said, I just think at some point there needed to be a slow, almost adaptation of the squad where they evolved into something new. And we talk about Eddie Howe's job, and he's done a fantastic job there. But there was a point, probably a couple of seasons ago, where that squad needed to have some investment, and also some new bodies and some new skill sets as well. And they tried to do that when they signed Diego Rico and Jefferson Lerma as well from Spain, but hasn't quite worked, and it feels to me like all their almost shortcomings are being exposed this year. And obviously the injury crisis doesn't help that. And now I've said all this, they're going to come to Carrow Road and look like a really slick, entertaining output, aren't they? But we shall see. I think they'll probably still be okay, is my thought. But yeah, not looking great for them at the moment, and they do need to turn it around.
They do. Watford, on the other hand, Jacob,
flying.
Yes.
Pearson just going back to basics, isn't it? We were surprised when he was hired, because obviously they've never hired an English coach before, apparently on the request of the players. Sure, Deeney was on top of that list. And he loves him, doesn't he? First time he's felt like a man, or treated like a man, is what he said about Pearson. And until he goes and calls someone an ostrich or tries to wrestle a player to the ground, he just gives you that momentum, doesn't he? He's done it at Leicester. He did a good job at Leicester. in terms of keeping them up. Miraculous recovery. Still don't know how they did that. And then obviously we know what happened the following season. And yeah, they're just so they already had a good squad. We've always said that the whole season. They just couldn't score. And in terms of that focal point with Deeney now fit up front, Sarr is always a threat. They spent 40 million on him. He should be a threat. And yeah, Decore rocking up a goal and assist for the first time in his career, playing a little bit more of an advanced position. I think he's a quality player. We said before he's been linked with Tottenham and things like that. I think he'd be a perfect addition there. And yeah, they're looking up, and that there's only a positive for them at the moment. But a couple of losses and they'll still be in it. It'll be interesting to see if that does happen, those losses, what happens then.
You've led me on nicely to the next point there.
You're welcome.
Are Watford going to get out of it, or what are our feelings on Watford?
Yeah, I think they probably will now. I think they've gathered enough momentum to probably help them get out of it, because ultimately, and as bizarre as this sounds, and in the situation Norwich are in, where it is desperate and it does look pretty bleak, 3 wins and their season could be revived. It's as simple as that, and that's all Watford has done. And in fairness to Pearson, I think he gets pigeonholed alongside sort of Allardyce and Pulis. He's probably a bit more philosophical than them. I would say that he has he's probably a better coach than them. I think is probably what I'd say. I'm not quite sure if his management techniques are for everyone, but if you get a certain group of players that respond to them, then as we've seen at Leicester, I think there's certainly a place for that. I think basically what he's done, and you said return to basics, absolutely spot on. I think that squad always felt like it was kind of in a false position. Obviously, it's taken 3 managers for it to respond, which is obviously a bit of a concern. But all he's done is made them structured, made them solid, and given freedom to Deulofeu and Ismaila Sarr, who looks like a different player now as well. And that seems to have got them results. And sometimes it's the small tweaks rather than the drastic changes. And sometimes you just need someone to come in and add a little bit of structure, which is probably what Norwich lack at the moment, in fairness, because if they had good structure for the games in December, then probably a lot of those performances would have been converted into results. Now, that's not to say that they need to go out and appoint Tony Pulis and go 4-4-2 with two banks of 4 and play direct football. But I think when you have that defensive structure, then it does help. But yeah, Nigel Pearson's done a good job, and I think if he does keep them up, then there's a definite shout there, and his name should be mentioned among managers of the season, because that is some job, considering they looked dead and buried before they came to Carrow Road.
Absolutely. Craig Shakespeare there, of course, as well. Jacob, do you fancy Watford to stay up?
Yeah, mate. I think there's worse teams than them in terms of, well, there's 3 below them now. I can see them potentially climbing above the likes of the Brightons, Newcastles. They're just on that forward momentum. An interesting point about Pearson and structure and what Norwich need. Did see Jack Reeve get asked the question, if Pearson was hired by Norwich, would he keep them up?
No. I think he's walked in. He's been quite fortunate with the players he's got there. I think. I think defensively they're still quite structured. They've got obviously Decore, who's a good holding midfielder, Etienne Capoue as well. So you've got the base there for a solid defensive foundation. I don't think you quite have the same at Norwich. Their players are geared, and Daniel Farker essentially said on loads of occasions at press conferences, like, it's not that I don't want to park the bus, which I don't think he would, to be quite honest, but it's that I don't have the players to, and he's absolutely right. I think Watford are perhaps more geared for, and they played 3 at the back for a long time, didn't they? So I think they've got the structure there, and he's almost brought that back and added a bit of attacking freedom and got the best out of their best players. I mean, it's a simple recipe, but it seems to have worked.
Absolutely. Watford, of course, climbing out of the relegation zone, and Villa dropping back in, who we'll address now. Losing 6-1 to Manchester City at Villa Park means Man City were rampant, really.
Yeah, but like Dean Smith said after the game, Villa didn't lay a glove on them. It was the best way of how not to play against Man City for me. In terms of Drinkwater starting, why? It's a question. It's a questionable one, isn't it? I think the stat is the last 4 times he's played, it's been against Man City. So when whatever club he's been at, yeah. So it's his off the field issues. He's not the right player to even bring in, I'd say, for that dressing room personally. But in terms of Villa, yeah, I was so surprised afterwards to hear the pundits say they'll be absolutely fine. They've got the defence, they've got the attack, because obviously without Wesley, Codger's injured. They've got no striker. They're obviously playing El Ghazi up front. I know they're linked with literally every man and his dog at the moment, but it's about bringing him back in. I think bringing Christian Benteke back in is questionable, considering how do you put all your eggs in one basket of a player who is so ludicrously out of form. It's going to be a big ask for them to stay up. But Grealish is the one, isn't he? In terms of, he does have that quality. When Norwich played Villa, he stood out for me personally in terms of having the quality to potentially drag them up the table. It'll be questionable. I don't think Dean Smith is fantastic tactically, and they're very open like us. And they've just got hammered. De Bruyne was class. Aguero obviously clinical. Yeah, it was a fantastic performance from City.
Nicely done. Nice little roundup, Jacob. So we'll move on to Southampton, and not their game, but Southampton generally, because they really have shown that you can get out of trouble, haven't they, in recent weeks?
And they've shown it by sticking to a philosophy as well. They lost 9-0, and if any team, I think any other team probably, other than Norwich or Southampton, do that, they sack their coach, they bring someone else in, and they probably look to be a bit more pragmatic. That's not Ralph Hasenhüttl. He was developed in the Red Bull institution, wasn't he? So I think they've done fantastically well in terms of their turnaround, and they seem to do it every year. But look, credit to them for sticking with a certain way, for not losing that. Obviously, the way they press is brilliant. Norwich couldn't handle it at St Mary's. I think they're a real threat. They've got a goal scorer in Danny Ings, who is, first of all, they've managed to get him fit, which is obviously a big part of his career, and equally they've got him firing again, and he looks unstoppable. And again, we're talking about small margins. They've got a wonderful free kick taker in James Ward-Prowse, and it's those moments in games and those small margins that can win and lose a Premier League game that are so pivotal. And at the moment, they're finding that they're getting a lot of them in their favour because of the way they're manufacturing games, I suppose, in terms of in those moments. So I'm pleased for Hasenhüttl because I like him. I like his style of play. I think it's up my street in terms of what I like to watch. High energy, sort of fully on the throttle. It's quite dangerous football. It's a bit Russian roulette at times, as the Leicester result proved. But I think they'll be okay, and I think he's a very good coach as well. And the squad they've got, the players they've got, they shouldn't be anywhere near where they are. But equally, when you've got, and this does sort of lend itself to a wider point about Norwich, when your objective is to produce players and recruit players and then sell them on for massive fees, ultimately you're going to reach a point where the river dries up and you don't get that productivity, and your recruitment doesn't quite work, and you don't have a player who can move for X money that produces the next conveyor belt. So that's kind of where they are. But if they get through this cycle and they get through this season, I think as long as they stick with Hasenhüttl, then the future's bright for them for sure.
Yeah, I think, we forget that Hasenhüttl with Leipzig, first season they went up, they finished second in the Bundesliga. Like I say, I also like their football, the high press, everything like that. Ings, 14 of the 27 goals have been scored from him. A good stat, 40% of his Premier League goals have come this season. So he is literally in the form of his life. And he's a cracking finisher. 3 games in a row away, they're unbeaten, 5 in general. They're in good form at the moment, aren't they? Ludicrously short at centre half in terms of they need a real restructure there. But like Con said, if they can not limp, I don't think they'll be anywhere near but get to the end of the season, have a real look at that squad, who they need, support Ings, make sure Ward-Prowse obviously stays. A set piece taker in this league is, as proven, is invaluable. And just add in parts. Gineppo's key in terms of I really do like him. Redmond, we know what he is, inconsistent. Same with Boufal. Add little sprinkles and they'll be fine for a couple more years to come.
Yeah, it's not like they've had an easy run of fixtures. They've beaten big teams, Leicester, Spurs, Chelsea, and those around them, Watford and Norwich.
Deservedly so as well.
Yeah.
There's not been one goal very lucky. Obviously, I know they beat Leicester by 1 goal, but I thought they were fully merited of the result. And in terms of when you've got a striker like that, in terms of just pure fire, you just feed him the ball, and that's what they've done. They've put him in the right positions, and he's done the rest. And fair play to Ralph. He's, like Connor said, he could have been sacked and almost laughed off from the Premier League, never to be seen again. But Southampton have proved that it doesn't always mean that a turn of manager means a certain upsurge.
Yeah. Okay, we'll leave the sort of wider league roundup there this week, because with Connor being here, we obviously want to get into the juicy January gossip. We weren't so sure that we'd have any sort of to talk about, but there has been movement in the last few days. So what I thought we'd do is we'll do the outgoings first, and then we'll get onto the new recruits. So Shrubeni leaving after 2.5 years.
Yep.
Apparently double money.
Not sure on double money, but they've made a profit.
Paderborn record transfer, I heard Farker say. So, which it won't be that much, but
which would make it more than £1 million, which
Yes,
is ultimately, I think, more than what they paid for him.
Good business. Philip Heiser going out on loan. It's been a weird sort of year for him, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, let's be frank. He was brought in for the Championship. He was brought in as a replacement left back, and obviously it's one of those. And I keep sort of thinking of a Stuart Webber quote for both sort of players who are going to progress from Norwich in the summer, and equally players who perhaps haven't quite made the grade. And I put Steepman in that bracket as well. Players who the club have perhaps moved a bit too fast for, and there are certain players, and you can put Maddison in this category as perhaps the best example of players who grow before the club. And I kind of feel like Heiser is below where Norwich are at the moment. But equally, if he has a good half of the season in the second Bundesliga, which is a real possibility. I mean, he's walked into a difficult situation at Nuremberg. They're fighting relegation. But if he gets a lot of minutes and Norwich are without a certain left back come August, then I think they have got a good option there. So, it's one of those where it's not quite worked so far, but Norwich could reap the benefits of that next season if he comes back and has minutes and can work himself into the first team squad.
Well, is that if that is the case and he does come back and play first team football, it will be good business loaning him out for the sort of 6 months we've got left.
Well, that's it. I think predominantly he's been featuring in the under-23s, hasn't he? And whilst that's useful, perhaps for the younger lads to work off a season pro like that, it's not beneficial for his career. And ultimately, he's at an age where he needs to be playing football, whether that's at Norwich or elsewhere. And like I said, it's just not quite worked. And sometimes you get that with recruitment. You'll plan for a scenario and a situation, and that deal was done because it was so obvious for Norwich that they should do it in terms of finances. And obviously, he was brought in with that in mind. Obviously, we've not seen too much of him. Partly because of Jamal Lewis and how well he's done, which we have to say equally. And equally, he walked into a squad that was winning games for fun. So that's always difficult to break into. But I don't think it's a slight on him. I just think it's where the club are and perhaps where his levels are at the moment, and they're not quite aligned.
Jacob, I'll come to you for the development loans because I know you've been looking at these.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
Akin for Mayway to St Mirren, Carlton Morris to MK Dons. Take it away.
Well, for Maywo's obviously, like you say, gone to St Mirren. It's quite funny, his quote about, don't know much about Scottish football, but I've talked to Kenny McLean.
That's
obviously,
all you need.
Yeah, well, he used to play for St Mirren, didn't he? And he's a big lad, isn't he, for Maywo? For a 21-year-old, he looks very, very built up and physically ready for a Scottish League battle. Left-footed, we've talked about the natural balance and Ben Gibson. Future, the club rate him highly, don't they, in terms of gave him a contract until 2023 back in November. So there's obviously, they feel like there's a player there who needs to go and develop, but potentially, who knows, next season, if the likely destination is a Championship, he could be in and around the squad again, and they'll want to see what he can do. Morris, obviously was at Rotherham, now come back to Norwich, then gone back to MK Dons with Russell Martin. He missed a whole season, didn't he, with that ACL injury last year in terms of at Shrewsbury. He did well. I feel like he's, again, a big strapping forward. I don't know if he's ever going to be a prolific goal scorer, but you never know. Again, when you drop down the level, he's a different versatile option in terms of hold up man. But yeah, we'll have to see. At 24, this is his kind of season to prove what he is. Is he at Norwich in terms of a player who we can actually use, or is he going to be a League One quality player? He has got a contract until 2021, so we'll see. But yeah, hopefully he does well for Russell in terms of we all want to see him do well and get up that managerial ladder. Keep MK Dons up, score some goals, and we'll see what he's like in pre-season.
Absolutely. Right, let's get on to the juicy stuff, Connor. Here we go. Incoming. Let's address Andre Duda first.
Very well said.
I've read your piece, the sort of profile piece you done on him. Very nice. Do you want to talk us through what sort of player we're getting here?
Yeah, he's a number 10. Daniel Farker can say he can play out wide, but I've not seen too much evidence of that. But I suppose the way Norwich deploy their attacking or their wingers, they're more sort of inverted, aren't they? So they're more like number 10s in wide slots anyway. So I suppose he could do a job there. He's a bit off the cuff. I think he's quite intelligent in terms of his movement. I read whilst I was doing research for that piece that last season he averaged about 3.2 threaded passes a game, or threaded through passes, which suddenly then if you think about Timu Puki's strengths and the way he plays on the defender and the sort of service he thrives off, that makes a lot of sense in terms of the service that Timu Puki wants, and Norwich haven't really given that to him in central phases of the pitch. They've often came from Buendia and sort of sliced through wide positions, and you're asking him to take the ball away from goal, which is perhaps not where he thrives. He likes to be in those central positions at perhaps an angle where he can finish from closer range, and we've seen how quick he is off the shoulder. So I think Duda will aid that. Interesting in terms of his character, former coach. You have to excuse my pronunciation as someone who isn't a native German, but or Hungarian or whatever he is. Kai Dardé, who was I think I've said that right, who was at Hoffenheim for 5 years, so brought Duda to the club, and then Duda had a year where he essentially just couldn't get himself fit. I think he had to wait 7 months for his competitive debut in the Bundesliga. The season after, again, struggled. And it was actually last season where he really sort of emerged in the Bundesliga as a bit of a star. Scored 11 goals, 6 assists, was crucial in Hoffenheim, progressing and pushing for the Europa League. So Norwich have got themselves a really good talent here. Ultimately, he's fallen out of favour because Dardé has since left the club. He's now involved in their youth ranks. They had a coach, and now they've got Jurgen Klinsmann, who doesn't seem to fancy him, whether it's an attitude issue, whether it's just doesn't rate him as a footballer or doesn't quite fit his tactical system or whatever. And Norwich have profited off that, and looks like an intelligent player, not quite quick, but not very quick rather, but is intelligent enough to work himself into opportunities. Almost like if you think about the way Steepman finds space, a bit like that. But perhaps a bit more nimble and a bit more nippy. So a very technical footballer as well, very good from the dead ball. I think in that piece there was a clip of him scoring a free kick under the wall, which is very De Bruyne-esque. But we'll leave those comparisons for now. let's just hope he can aid the cause. But I think it's one of those deals where it's a loan for 6 months, so the finances involved make sense because Norwich aren't sort of lumbered with a Naismith type, I suppose. You brand it where they're on big money and they've paid a big fee and they're stuck with them for 3 or 4 years. If it doesn't work and Norwich get relegated, then hey, no problem. He goes back to the Bundesliga. Norwich go down and they rebuild. So makes financial sense. Player suits the system. I think this is a really smart deal, and whether that can translate onto the pitch and he can convert it into performances, because this year has been a struggle for him, we shall see. But certainly a technically proficient midfielder, so he fits Daniel Farke's remit of a potential Norwich City signing for me.
Jacob, initial thoughts on Andre Duda and what you would like him to come in and do?
Well, I think Cam is a position which there's just not been that correct connection in terms of development for players this year. Obviously, Kenny's been tried, Steepman's been tried. Whoever's played in Cam this season, there's been no one who's scored from that position. Kenny's goal against Man City was when he was central midfield, and it's not good enough, really, is it? When you're getting down to cold hard facts, like Connor said, 11 goals, 7 assists in Bundesliga, can't be sniffed at the end of the day. So it's a good league. I worry slightly about the match fitness. Let's not expect too much too soon. But again, compilation reels always get you excited, don't they? That no look back heel assist is different level, isn't it? Hopefully he can progress enough and have enough desire for Norwich. In terms of, he seems a bit of a maverick, obviously falling out with Klinsmann, otherwise there's you wouldn't sell, so he hasn't had a great season this year. But that's what Norwich deal with at the moment, isn't it, in terms of players who have slightly fallen off their original perch.
That's it, yeah, and that is, and almost links, again, to a wider point about, you can chuck Mo Leitner, Joseph Dermich, in terms of, if you are buying those sort of players who are considered damaged goods, then sometimes they come with a dent in them, and that might mean injury problems. It might mean perhaps they're a little bit emotional, I think is perhaps the word I'll use. And with him, interestingly, and you mentioned the profile piece I did when I was researching that, there was a quote from Dardé who essentially said he's a player who governs himself. He has autonomy in terms of the way he goes about his work. So he's not a player who needs an arm around the shoulder. He almost won't respond to these motivational speeches that perhaps get some players fired up. He does that himself. So clearly someone with an interesting personality, and like I say, that's the gamble you take when you're in Norwich City's situation, and when you need goals from that position. You mentioned there the attacking midfielders. I think that's been a real issue of concern, as I think the midfield has been one of Norwich's biggest issues this season, because I think the structure not being right there has probably prevented the whole team from kicking on.
In terms of a free kick threat, we haven't scored directly from a free kick this season, so again, can't complain. Vrancic, Buendia, Duda, there's options there now, hopefully, to score from one and score plenty more, assist Pookie, and keep us up. No pressure.
Yeah, excellent stuff. Let's move on to the one that caught us all slightly off guard yesterday. Well, I say us all. Perhaps it didn't catch you off guard, Connor.
It did a little bit. It did a little bit.
Well,
yeah,
when did you first hear about the Lucas Rupp deal?
So I found
LR7.
I would have found out the morning of it being announced. So
Okay.
yesterday morning, as we're filming this, and it was unlike Duda, he was a player that I wasn't too familiar with. I think the name was probably like, okay, I've heard it before, but I couldn't tell you anything about him. And looking online, I did a similar profile piece for him. It was much harder to do in terms of trying to dig out quotes and facts and perhaps what ex-coaches have said about him and even like to the extent of highlight reels. And you said it there for Duda, plenty on him. You've got them coming out of your ears for the Slovakian, but in terms of Rupp, it was all very sort of unsensational. There was not a lot in there at all in terms of what sort of player he was. The most you could extract from it was that his dad used to be a handball player, which was interesting in itself, and that he's pretty much a utility man. You know, he can do a job anywhere. He'll run all day. Perhaps what that means in terms of his technique, I'm not sure, because I haven't seen enough of him to comment on that. And as I said in the video I did for the Pinkun yesterday, and after it was announced, there are a lot of aspects to this deal that I think that is very Norwich City, and there's a lot of aspects to it that I think isn't. So it's a really interesting one. It's not one that ticks perhaps a lot of boxes, but we'll see. We'll see. He might be one that they've got in mind, and for next season, he might be one that comes in right now. I suppose we'll only find out in the weeks and months to come.
Yeah, absolutely. You've led me on wonderfully there about ticking boxes, Jacob. And when the deal broke, we did have a chat about it, didn't we? And we thought he's a bit older than what we usually go for. Just your general thoughts on Lucas Rupp.
Well, interesting again, like Connor saying, researching him, his contract was going to expire at the end of the season. So again, to pay around 500k for him, to bring him in now, is it just to acclimatise him to the squad? It's a look to next season. So take that as you will in terms of league position and everything like that. Yeah, 29. It's an interesting one. Maybe it is a slight. We do need a little bit more experience in the squad. And a versatile player in terms of what we're listening or hearing about him, in terms of he can play central midfield, has played wide, can play fullback.
Can he play fullback, or is Daniel Parker said he can play fullback? That's the real
It could be a Marco Stiepermann. We did message Dan O'Hagan, who is all Bundesliga. He did say, and I'm going to quote here to make sure I'm not incorrect, was a useful player until he did his cruciate in 2018 and has struggled to get back into the Hoffenheim team since. He's a quality addition in central midfield.
Okay.
So take that, again, what you will. I trust those words from a man who's watched Bundesliga for the last few years, to be honest.
So if we even see him this season, are we expecting him to line up against next to a Tribal or a Tete in that sort of double pivot? Is that what you're expecting to see?
It seems to me like he can do it all. I think perhaps makes a bit more sense, because for me, and I said it before, a few minutes ago actually, in terms of that midfield structure, I think if they've got someone who can link what Alex Tete does with what and Kenny McLean's playing there at the moment, but ultimately I think it'll be Andre Duda. Then ultimately that's going to help them progress up the pitch. I think there were a lot of moments, and Old Trafford was a glaring example of that, of where they just could not progress the ball well enough. So I think if he can do that, and he might be a bit different in terms of, and again, I'm sort of going off what I think a sort of player is, as opposed to what I know what sort of player is. But I get the impression that perhaps he's not as technically proficient as some other Norwich City operators in that position. But I do think he's a bit more energetic, which can lend itself to the Premier League. If you think about, this is the image I have in my head, and in a few weeks back, people might listen back to this and laugh, but and I might laugh as well. I probably will laugh as well.
We'll clip it up for you.
Absolutely. But I've kind of got the mould of a Gary O'Neill in my head, to the point where he's neither here nor there, but his energy is thunder and lightning. He's almost in the action. He's involved, but almost doesn't really have like a specific skill. Like, he's not particularly brilliant at well, not brilliant, but because he'd be better than me, for example, but which isn't hard. But he's not exactly someone who's going to ping a 40-yard pass to the right winger, or he's not someone who's going to complete a massive tackle. But he's just going to be in games, and he's going to be involved in games. And if Norwich, and who knows, this might mean a change of approach, but if he is involved this season, he could be there to make it a bit more of an arm wrestle and to give Norwich a bit more competition in midfield. And if he does that, then I think it would make sense to have him next to someone like Alex Tettey, to be honest. But again, it all ends into what Daniel Farke tries to do, and there's a lot of midfielders at the moment with lots of different skill sets. So I think there's a number of partnerships in that double pivot that could work.
It sounds as though we're probably not going to see Lucas Rupp at the weekend, but Jacob, are you expecting to see Andre Duda in the starting 11 or on the bench?
I'd be very, very shocked if he's not in the 18. I don't think you can start him. It wouldn't surprise me if they do, but I would expect to see him on the bench. And then I think even when you bring him on, if the supporters have seen the reels, the highlight reels and all that, they know they've got a decent player here in terms of international as well, scored in the Euros. You can list all these kind of accolades off. And Norwich do have an upgrade there. There's no competition in terms of Kenny McLean, Marco Stiepen have not hit the heights Duda has yet. So there is an improvement there. Hopefully he can bring a little bit of something different to Norwich and help us beat Bournemouth.
Expecting to see him at the weekend, Connor?
Yes, yeah. I think, and Daniel Farke doesn't do it very often, but I think for a rare occasion, I think he'll start him, because Norwich are in such a situation. It is a do or die game to some extent, or it certainly is perceived that way within the fan base. So I think it is important that there seems to be proactive, because I can already imagine in my head what happens if he doesn't start and they go on to lose. So I think he'll play. I don't think he'll complete the 90, but I think he will start. And I think he may even surprise a few. I think we might see Rupp on the bench as well. But that's just me speculating more than any inside info that I have, which is very little, by the way. So
well, again, leading me on brilliantly. So they're the confirmed deals. I do want to pick your brain a bit about names we've heard and what you've heard. I'll start with Xavi Quintilla.
Do you just want yes or no answers?
As much as you can.
One to think about. But
so this is Spanish left back.
Probably not for now.
Okay.
Summer maybe.
But what you've got to remember is at this time of year, you've got scouts going out to watch people, agents trying to get new contracts. He's out of contract in the summer. He feasibly could be an agent. Feasibly could be someone that Norwich have had a look at because he's popped up on their radar and has decent the core statistics that they look for in recruitment. So just because they've scouted a player doesn't mean they're interested, I think is what I caveat all of these things with.
I take it Lucas Biglia is an absolute rumour, no-go.
Well, as far as I'm aware, no. I don't think it would be a very Norwich City signing. I'm always a bit sceptical when it's Norwich and Watford and someone else and someone else, because that to me just stinks of agent talk to try and drum up a bit of interest. And often Norwich can be used that because they can be seen because of the position they're in, even though we know that's not the case, to be a bit desperate in this window and be a bit frantic and scrambling for players. But as far as I'm aware, Lucas Biglia isn't on the list, and I'd be surprised if any other midfielder is, to be honest. Yeah.
Any names to add, Jacob?
No, mate. I'm completely out of the loop for now. The two linked are the main ones, aren't they? I would expect us to see maybe one or two. Obviously, with the homegrown and all of that now, all the spaces are taken up, aren't they? So it would have to. For a foreign player, one would have to leave. But
well, you say that there is a loophole in the registration where if they buy a player who's under 21, then I believe they don't have to be registered. So technically they could get in, but then you're asking them to pay perhaps a bit more money. So it's a difficult situation that they find themselves in, because ultimately the domestic market is probably out of where they are in terms of finances. Certainly, even at the top end of the Championship, but most definitely in the Premier League, unless we're looking at a loan. But then you're asking another team to strengthen a direct relegation rival, and our teams are realistically going to do that. It's difficult. So I don't know how much more to expect, but I'd be shocked if there wasn't another.
So you think maybe one more?
Yeah, I can't see there being more than two more. And I'd be shocked if there was two, to be honest.
And if you were Stuart Webber, where would you strengthen?
It's a difficult one. I know a lot of people want a centre-back, but to me it's a difficult situation, because Norwich could sign a centre-back on loan. They could take 2 weeks to get up to scratch. Suddenly you've got Ben Godfrey fit again. Tim Closer's not far down the line, and by the time you hit March, you've got 5 fit centre-backs. And if you throw Ibrahim Amadou into that, suddenly that's 6. If you throw a new recruit in that, suddenly that's 7 centre-backs in the building. That's too much. Yeah. That's overkill. And I know you can say, well, they had the injury crisis in October. That's. I mean, if that happens again, then they are the unluckiest team in the world. So I think it's a difficult sell to buy a centre back or recruit a centre back. I certainly think they'd like one. But what that means for the wider picture, I don't know. I've seen a few comments about Ben Godfrey moving into defensive midfield. I can't see that either.
It won't happen under Farke, will it?
No. I think once the German way of developing players is very much, this is your position, you develop it now. It's not like, say, in Portugal, where essentially until they're 17, 16, they play small-sided games and they don't really have fixed positions, which is why Eric Dyer is a bit of an all-rounder, because he obviously progressed through the Portuguese system, so can essentially play in a range of positions for that very reason. Whereas I don't think Ben Godfrey is that way inclined. And equally, just because he played for York City, aged however old he was at that point in defensive midfield, and for Shrewsbury Town in League One, that doesn't mean that he's going to be capable enough of doing it in the Premier League. But it's certainly an interesting point, because the raw materials he has could certainly apply itself, and it wouldn't surprise me if he went on to be a very good defensive midfielder, but I don't think we'll see him there for Norwich City anytime soon.
The only other position I can think of is a winger, because we saw Patrick Roberts go back on loan. Are you expecting to see anything there?
I would like to see another Onel in terms of quick, direct, because obviously we've got your Emmys, your Todds, in terms of they're nailed down. So in terms of bringing in a similar player to that, it would be a pointless addition for me. I would like to see a little bit of pace, but again, it's one of those, isn't it? It's finely balanced. I'd perhaps see a loan in terms of who are you attracting permanently, who's not going to try and leech off the club, or just a Premier League deal sort of thing. Potentially a loan, but nothing else other than that.
I think it's a difficult one, the winger situation. I kind of don't think they're going to, and this is sort of a new development, I don't think that they're going to get a winger for the reasons that Daniel Farke's, if you look at his quotes for both Rupp and Duda, he's both pointed out that they can both play out wide. So I think that probably takes the focus off of signing a winger. Yeah, I think centre-back is the glaring hole for me, but as I've said, the situation could change radically. I think Ben Godfrey has probably returned to training this week, or was due to return to training this week, and certainly from his social media, looks like he has done, so he could be back in contention, and that becomes a difficult area. But as you said there, I mean, it's a difficult sell for them at the moment, because ultimately any player they sign has to be sold to the realisation that they could be a championship player and could have their wages dramatically reduced in 5-6 months, and that's a difficult realisation for any player, and also takes a bit of modesty as well, because a lot of players will think I'm a bit better than that. So it's a difficult one to sell. Equally, players in January cost far more. It's a notoriously more difficult window to operate in. That's why so little happens in January, really, compared to perhaps all the hype it gets. But yeah, I think one more is probably what I expect. Two more probably at a push.
Okay. And just finally, do you expect any more outgoings?
As I sit here now, no. I think the only obvious one is Eder on loan. I think if that situation doesn't develop to a point where he looks certainly looks to have adapted a bit more to Premier League football, then not. But that would leave them with two strikers, so they would have to go and get someone else in, particularly given Dermot's injury record. So again, that could force their hand depending on how he does. So that may be where the third one comes from. I don't know. Who knows? Given the way the Rupp deal happened, then we could be sitting here tomorrow talking about a new signing. So it's the way the transfer window works. I think there'll be lots of speculation. Probably very little happens. It's probably my honest answer to that. But as I sit here now, I don't expect any more outgoings, unless, like we say, there's a non-homegrown player who they really like, and they have to shift someone on to do that. But even in those scenarios, I can only see a loan deal, and I suppose your prime candidates for that would be Mo Leitner, given that he hasn't played a lot of football in recent months.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Anything to add, Jacob?
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say, in terms of shifting players on, you've probably got rid of you too, in terms of Sabeni and Heiser. Maybe a Leitner, like you say, probably wants first-team football, but unlikely considering his qualities potentially for next season.
I think the final point I'll add on the registration thing is, and it's complex in the Premier League. It's more lenient, but it's complex. Is the fact that Norwich have two of their three goalkeepers who aren't homegrown. So Ralph Fearman and Michael McGovern, who you would expect to be homegrown. So equally, then you could technically say when that registration window opens again, do we need three goalkeepers? But then you're asking Michael McGovern, who signed a new contract, actually you're not going to be involved in Premier League squads, which given Ralph Fearman has been injured makes that a bit complicated. And then equally you're probably relying on Archie Mayer from the 23s, and then Billy Johnson has been sent out on loan today, who's an under-23s keeper. So it's the knock-on effects these things have. It's never as simple as just we'll just shift one of them out. So it's a complex situation they're dealing with. I think it'll either be a loan or they'll buy a young player, because that's all they can do with the registration, because I think the domestic market is probably a bit beyond where they are at the moment.
Have you heard any names in recent days?
No, I haven't. Rupp was the last name that came across my desk, so I'll keep you updated.
Dig in, Joe, dig in.
Yeah, I did try. Right.
Not that I would tell you if I did. In fairness, but.
Right, we will eventually get on to Bournemouth, but just before we do that, I just want to have a bit of a Premier League versus Championship debate, because it feels like it's rumbled on all season, doesn't it? As soon as we started sort of losing, it's sort of, I prefer the Championship. We'll be back there soon, blah, blah, blah. I wanted to put it to you with a different angle, Connor. Professionally, from a professional point of view, just how much of a difference does the Premier League versus the Championship make to your job?
Small games, so that's a positive, I suppose. In terms of, I think you want to be out in the field a bit more, don't you? So, although when those games are perhaps Preston in midweek, they're probably not not as glamorous as it seems sometimes. But that means more hours on the road. It's I think it's one of those things, isn't it? You sort of adapt to it. What I would say about the broader debate is that nobody enjoyed the Championship more when Norwich were a mid-table Championship side. So there's that caveat to it. I don't know is the answer. Obviously, I've not worked in the Championship before, so it'd be a new experience for me. I enjoyed Preston when I was there, certainly in terms of facilities, and certainly a lot less media there. So I'm thinking there might be a bit more room in the Carrow Road press box, which would be nice. But yeah, who knows? I suppose that's a new horizon. Hopefully we won't have to, or I won't have to encounter that next season, but we shall see. I suppose in terms of us though, there's obviously, in terms of the right holders, there's less eyes on them. So I think we probably step up and take an increased presence, if you like. So professionally, Norwich being in the Championship is probably better for us. But it's obviously not what we want. You want to see Norwich City at the top, because everyone in this county thrives off that, and the city thrives off it as well. And I think this county and probably this region of East Anglia needs a team in the Premier League, because it's such a big area. And let's be frank about it, if it's not Norwich City, who else is it going to be at this moment in time?
Yeah,
Kings Lynn. They're going forwards.
I mean,
second biggest team in East Anglia.
Yeah, of course. Are we counting Colchester as well? Perhaps
Well, we actually bumped into them on the way home from, where were we on Saturday? Manchester United.
Yeah.
We stopped at a very glamorous service station off of the A1, and the Colchester team rocked up. They were all buying coffees and whatnot. I think they were at Morecambe. I don't know how they got on actually off the top of my head. Someone said they won, so they were happy anyway. So I hope they won. But yeah, there you go. Nice little story about Colchester that I wasn't expecting to tell today.
I mean, this whole Premier League versus Championship debate, as a three, being me, Jacob and Harvey, we speak about it a fair bit. And Jacob, anything to get off your chest this week? Anything new you've thought of?
Well, again, like Connor said, in terms of, there was a reason why we sacked Alex Neil, because we didn't think that 8th, 10th in the Championship was good enough for a size of our squad. I do understand in terms of the VAR, it does take away the emotion, but next season we could go away to Middlesbrough. There's a clear offside for one of their goals, and we're like, VAR would have given that in our favour. There's no positive in terms of the Championship, because it's rough, midweek, meh. You will get to see more games away, potentially. That's your bonus. But the Premier League is where you want to be. You want to aim to be the best. That's what me personally, you aim to be the best. I'm not a massive fan of the top 26 thing either. I'd much rather be, I want to be top 17. But again, that's a whole different debate for club and all that, finances. For me, Premier League is where I would like to be.
What I would add on the top 26 thing, and it's a broader point, and I'm not singling anyone out or giving a view on the ownership debate, but what I will say is, as we sit here now with all of the factors and all the benefactors Norwich have at the moment, it is an incredible achievement that they are in the Premier League with how they function and run as a football club, because ultimately they've got an owner who, rightly or wrongly, for the right reasons in my opinion, but everyone doesn't agree with that, and that's fine, they're entitled to their opinions, doesn't pump money into the football club in the same way that other teams do. They for example, look at how much money Aston Villa spent this year. They're 2 places above Norwich. Yeah. That's the realisation, and the reality is, of course, that 3 teams have to drop out, so ultimately you're going to get a team that spend big money. But I think there is no other team trying to do what Norwich City are doing at the moment in the Premier League, or probably a lot of the Championship, in terms of being self-financing, in terms of giving players a chance who've lost their way, in terms of being a club who try and play a certain way given their finances, because there is a ceiling to that. And I think actually they deserve a lot of praise. And when you mention the top 26, it's difficult because that's where they sit financially, because everything about Norwich City as they currently sit is not Premier League standard. And then you could probably put the team in that as well, as we've seen this season. But certainly, I'd say the fan base is, absolutely. But in terms of perhaps the facilities, because let's not forget, a year ago, the training ground consisted of about, and I went there myself, about 25 to 30 porta cabins. It's a lot better now, but it's still a long way short of perhaps other Premier League facilities. The stadium as well, in comparatively to other Premier League grounds, it's a fairly small stadium, well populated, but small. And so everything that Norwich have done and have tried to do is so against the conventions of what a Premier League team should be. And that, in my opinion, whether you agree with the current ownership debate, which we won't go into because that's an entirely different podcast, but that should be applauded, and people should be proud of that fact, because there's not a lot of teams doing it the way Norwich City doing it. But as I said, that does have a ceiling.
Nicely put. Gents, let's move on to the Bournemouth game. We need to look forward. It doesn't get much more must-win than this. If it does feel like a big game, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I wrote earlier that it feels like Norwich are very much propped against the bar of the last chance saloon, doesn't it? If they don't win this one, even if they do win it, I think it's going to be no Premier League team has survived from the point they are at the moment. So it's going to take the greatest of great escapes. Now we're talking. But yeah, if they don't lose on Saturday, then I think it will be a bookender for a lot of fans in terms of where they are. It's going to be a really difficult second half of the season, ultimately, if they don't win that game against Bournemouth. And it will probably conclude that they aren't good enough, for sure. I think we've seen probably enough over the first half of the season that indicates that. I think the frustration is that they've been quite close in terms of performances, and if they could have converted even a couple more of those performances into 3 points, then their situation would be a bit better. But if you can't beat the teams around you, and Norwich sit bottom of the list in terms of the head-to-head record of the bottom 7, obviously only beating Newcastle and Everton are probably in a false position as well. I think they'll probably push up now. They've got Ancelotti. So if they don't win that game, I think that is probably it for them, and we are probably looking at a long march back to the Championship. But even if they do, I certainly wouldn't encourage people to raise their hopes and expect for some sort of miraculous recovery, because I fear the damage is done for them, to be honest. But yeah, if they lose, then it's certainly going to be, or don't win rather, then I think it's going to be the day that a lot of the Carrow Road faithful drew the curtains and said goodnight.
Yeah, Jacob Connor's absolutely right. It does feel like a marker in the sand, doesn't it, this Bournemouth game?
Well, yeah, you to look at Bournemouth's form, don't you? 4 points from a possible 33. Callum Wilson not had a shot on target since the 6th of October. Their main threat in terms of they're missing key players. Brooks wide, missing most of the season. It's a big threat. Ryan Fraser out of form. 7 goals, 14 assists last season. This year, 1 goal, 3 assists. I think he kind of sums them up perfectly in terms of, I don't know if they, like we were saying earlier, hit a ceiling. Potentially a little bit of egos crept in there in terms of like Stoke. There was they didn't redevelop their squad. There was signings made like your Solankis and other players who don't fit the model or haven't fit the previous model, and it's just all kind of come to a head now. They do have players of quality. Lerma spent 25 million on him. Rico again, decent money. Callum Wilson has played and scored for England. So in terms of quality, you should say Bournemouth on a good squad day have a better team than Norwich, but after watching that Watford performance, they're so low on confidence. It looked so much like when we played Watford in terms of having the ball but not really having an idea what to do, no real structure. Yeah, this is your opportunity to kind of go, right, last chance saloon. If you want to somehow make a miraculous recovery, then you start it from this game, really.
Absolutely. I mean, you spoke about threats there and the threats that Bournemouth pose. For me, I was looking at the stats today, and by far and away, Harry Wilson is the danger man for me, especially when you consider that we're not particularly good at defending set pieces or even dealing with crosses in open play. Are you expecting him to give Norwich a difficult game?
Well, he feels like we've been linked with him for about 400 windows, doesn't it, in terms of will he ever come to Norwich? Yeah, he's their top goal scorer, isn't he? And we've seen his free kicks and all, like last season, that Manchester United goal against Manchester United, those kind of things. He does have that threat, and we've said earlier, Norwich conceding 10 goals from indirect free kicks, corners. That is the Achilles heel. In terms of Bournemouth themselves, they don't look like they've got any movement outside, like on just outside of corners and all of those kind of things. Like Solanke's not scored for them in the Premier League. He scored a scruffy goal against Luton in the Cup. He is not a threat, I wouldn't say. If you get Wilson in behind, Wilson against Hanley, I do slightly worry about in terms of movement and all that kind of thing. But yeah, Harry Wilson, I'd say, is the main threat.
Yeah, absolutely. Connor, how do you see the game panning out? Because I actually think we could have quite a positive result. I'm not saying it will start a massive run or anything, but I do think we could see a result this weekend. What do you think?
I think they'll win, to be honest. I just think it's set up quite nicely for them. I think Bournemouth are going to be there and they're going to be desperate. And Norwich are in a situation where, okay, the game is big, but I would say they're probably under slightly less pressure, because I think the majority, certainly externally and probably increasingly internally, probably anticipate that they're going to go down.
Well, even if we do, and we'll still be 3 points off Bournemouth.
Absolutely. So I think a win for Norwich probably means a lot less than it does for Bournemouth, because, as I said earlier, they are in complete free fall. And if they lose here, then for me that has to be goodbye Eddie Howe, and they have to almost basically have a survival plan, and what that looks like, I don't know. So I think everything there is geared perhaps more towards Norwich, but as I said earlier, I wouldn't put it past Bournemouth to turn up at Carrow Road and look a really slick outfit who suddenly Callum Wilson's can find the back of the net or the target, as the case may be. But I think it will be edgy. I think it will be scrappy. I think in those situations that probably suits Norwich a bit more, because ultimately, I think the game is going to be less dependent on small margins and perhaps about more who can grab it and dominate it. And if Norwich can do that, and with the momentum that Duda perhaps has and the narrative that forms there about him bursting onto that stage and making an impression, I certainly think there's points to grab. And ultimately, that might not mean very much in the grand scheme of things and the grand sort of outlook of the season. But by the same token, who knows? Stranger things have happened. Football is about expecting the unexpected. It could spark a revival akin to that of Watford. So who knows? It's all to play for, that's for sure. You've got two teams who, for individual reasons, will be absolutely desperate to win that game. But let's make it crystal clear: whichever team does win it is going to feel like they're on the straight and narrow again. And I think if Norwich win it, then perhaps it's feasible to see a way they can get out of the situation, even though it is unlikely. It probably just sort of lowers their odds a bit more. But a really interesting game, and I've said all that, it'd probably be a 0-0.
On that topic, can I push you for a predicted score?
Yeah, I do think Norwich will win. I do think it'll be scrappy. I think Bournemouth will actually score first. So I think Norwich are going to break their trend and actually get some points from a losing position, because they've taken the lead and not capitalised on that. So there's got to be a point where actually they do the reverse effect. So I'm going to go for a 3-1.
Okay. Jacob, your thoughts on the game generally and eventually a score prediction?
I think you've got to feel confident. We've got the one player outside of the big six clubs who's created the most chances in Emi Buendia. And we have got a fit, I'm going to say, inverted commas, looking over at Connor, just making sure, confirming that Timu Pukki, obviously back in training. You feel like he's got a point to prove as well now, in terms of, again, has gone on a little streak of not got a scoring. The pressure will be on him. I think he does like the pressure in parts, as long as he's feeling confident upstairs. And Buendia, hopefully Duda can give him an opportunity. And looking at Mark Travers at the weekend, wasn't a spectacular goalkeeper. Hopefully we're not seeing Rui Patricio against Wolves again, all that wonderful display. I do feel confident, and going to go 2-1 Norwich.
Okay. I'm going to go 2-0 Norwich. I think we'll keep a clean sheet.
You do think that, don't you, in terms of we can't defend very well, but you do feel like that?
I'll caveat that with that Bournemouth haven't scored for 3 games. It's more that than how good we've been at defending. Okay, so that's the Bournemouth game. This is the final point I want to make. Let's say we do win at the weekend, and let's say it does spark some sort of revival.
I'm with you. I like it.
I wanted to go through the fixtures and just
okay.
get a very quick prediction of where you think the points are coming from.
Okay.
So I'll say the fixture, and then you can say 1.
Is this with
3.
my positive cap on? Or
Whatever
just
cap you want to
realist?
wear, Connor.
Okay.
Whatever cap, realist or optimist, whatever you
Okay.
want. But 1 point, none or 3.
Joe's got his green and yellow tinted glasses on, haven't
I
you?
have still,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Unless we lose at the weekend.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so Bournemouth 3 points, yeah?
Yeah, I've gone 3 points there, yeah.
Okay, Tottenham away.
Optimistically 1 point.
Okay. Newcastle away.
3 points.
Liverpool at home.
See, the thing is, I wouldn't put it past Norwich to be the side that beat them.
Only beat them.
That's
Yeah, Man
to go
City,
to
yeah.
go down by a whimper, but to beat Manchester City and Liverpool would
Yeah.
not surprise me. But I think there's, I find it very hard to see away Norwich get any point or goal in that game or shot. So, yeah, 0 points from that one.
Okay. Wolves away.
0,
Leicester at home.
0,
Sheffield United away.
0,
Southampton at home.
3,
Everton at home.
3,
Watford away.
1,
West Ham at home.
1,
Chelsea away.
0,
Burnley at home.
3,
And finally Man City away.
3. No.
That
I don't know how much that adds up to.
it doesn't sound
But
like
not-
enough.
not
We've done
enough.
this earlier, and
It's that run, isn't it?
Yeah.
Liverpool, what would you say?
Wolves,
Wolves, Leicester,
Leicester,
Sheffield United.
United,
That's
yeah.
tough. That's
yeah,
tough.
it is. Yeah, I mean,
They're going to have to go and basically cause upsets. I think when I've looked at it, there's not very many winnable away games left, but a few at home where you could fancy them. But they are going to have to go places like Spurs and get a point or 3, and that seems quite unlikely.
yeah.
But no, in Norwich, they'll extract the points from there and then lose the games that perhaps people anticipate them winning. It would be the way they go, and
I mean, how much blame do you apportion to the fact we just haven't beaten the teams around us really this season?
oh, massively, yeah, massively. I think Norwich will look back on that and massively regret it. That Palace game, unbelievable opportunity at 1-0. Kenny McLean hits the bar. They have numerous other chances, and their inability to kill off games has proved costly and proved terminal, because at this level teams raise their levels, and the problem for Norwich, and I'm going to go back to that VAR goal and the injustice or the justice, whichever side of the 3 pixel fence you sit on, that would have been Norwich scoring a decisive second goal in the game. That would have killed off the game. Norwich would have gone on and beat Tottenham. Equally, if Kenny McLean's shot had gone 2 inches lower and hit the underside of the bar and crashed in, that would have decided that game. And that's it. Their inability to do that, plus their ability to snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory, I suppose, is incredible. So sadly, I think when you do that, it becomes increasingly difficult and probably too much of an ask to survive at this level. And look, they're going to go down. I think they're probably going to lose a core part of that squad, and they're going to have to rebuild again, and that's not going to be easy. But I'll caveat that by saying there's an opportunity that, in my opinion, providing that they get the deals they want to do, then there's a massive windfall that they're sitting on, essentially. And if you think about some of the fees that are bandied about, and these aren't my prices, they're obviously the fees that have been reported, then there's a possibility that Norwich recoup 100 million in the summer, and that's enough to go again, isn't it, with a parachute payment?
Absolutely.
So we'll see what happens. Hopefully they don't get to that stage, and who knows? Perhaps the next time I appear on here, we'll be talking about one of the greatest Premier League comebacks we've ever seen. But I fear it is unlikely.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Jacob, before we sign off, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree with Connor again, that December and then Palace in January's killed us off really. 5 home games in a row when you're 1-0 or 1 goal up at half time and you don't win any of them. It's a lot of points to lose, isn't it? And if you win all of those games, you're in it, you're about it. And yeah, it is unfortunate. I do feel like at the end of the season it is going to be relegation, but with my positive hat on, you've seen the likes of Burnley go down, come back stronger, even though they sold Danny Ings, players like that. We will sell, again, a few players, and you, again, could be looking at around 100-odd million. That's a lot of money. And
It's sort of stadium expansion money.
Any money, it goes into the squad first, Webbers, remember?
Okay, fair enough.
And yeah, I feel like with that kind of money, you feel like Farker and Webber have done it with a lot less and a lot more difficult circumstances. So I trust them to get it right.
I think the difficulty this time, if they go down, is
Expectation.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Webber's not done it under expectation. That's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting narrative to see how they react, because obviously last time when they were under expectation, they really crumbled, and it was probably the most apathetic a lot of people have felt about a Norwich side for a long time. So it can go the other way as well. And equally last time, Norwich stuck with their manager and Alex Neil and didn't go to plan after a lot of people quoted Burnley. So it can go the other way, and it's individual. But yeah, like I say, let's hope we're not talking about that.
Let's hope so. Connor, thank you so much for joining us, mate.
Thank you, absolute pleasure.
It's been very nice to have you on. Jacob, as always, good to speak to you, mate.
Connor's shown us exactly how it's done. So we've got those standards for next week. But
I'm sure
Connor,
some people will disagree.
yeah, it's been great to have you on, mate. Much appreciated.
Thanks very much for listening. Please do like, follow, all that good stuff. And yeah, we will be back next week.
Yeah, hopefully after a Bournemouth win.
Yes, let's hope so. Thank you very much for listening, and enjoy the rest of your week.